I'm used to in these situations having the sort of pre-talk time be something where I get to show you fun breakdancing videos, but recognize that that was not the case in this particular time. But I didn't want to completely leave it out because if you're familiar with something called the Olympics, they had something that they called breakdancing, which was completely unrelated to anything that I've ever seen, called breakdancing. Michael Jackson's Thriller is an okay music video, but perhaps not the peak of breakdancing abilities. This is Korea versus Japan from 2017. There's a battle of the year happens every year in either France or Germany, and I make it is destination watching. It's a 2-day event, and it's destination watching for me every year. I sit down with some absinthe, and I just watch breakdancing for 2 days straight. Because these sort of things, breakdancing battles is how this is decided. There is exhibitions, there is people sort of showing off moves. There's even like artistic exhibitions where people are trying to kind of, look cool, which is obviously a huge part of it. You're supposed to look cool. But in the end of it is the actual breakdancing battle, where you have a group of fairly young people from one country, and then a group of fairly young people from another country, and they don't speak the same language. They don't really know each other. But what they know is this thing that they do together, and they solve conflicts with dancing. And maybe at this point, it's because absinthe is part of the plan of watching this thing, but I think about that. I think about the very concept of conflict resolution through dancing, and it enthralls me all the time. You ever want to talk about breakdancing? I'm around. But hey, how's it going? All right. No problem. Okay, we're after lunch. We're on day one, and I get that. I also get that I'm in the Nordic countries, and so I'm going to, I'm here with you. I'm here with you is what I want to say. I want to draw this out of you, because I'm going to give you a compliment sandwich, right? I'm going to give you a compliment sandwich right now, which is all of you people, you look lovely. You're lovely looking people. You're attractive people. That response was terrible. There's the meat of the sandwich. And also, I really like the clothes you're wearing. So there's your compliment sandwich. So with that said, let's try this just one more time. How's it going? Fuck yeah, Copenhagen. How are you doing? My name is Lemon, and I'm a person that makes websites. I've been making websites for over 20 years. It's something that I really love doing. It's something I really love talking about as well. I'm actually from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So if you're not familiar with the United States, it's the United States. Minnesota's up there. But this is my second time in Copenhagen. I love it. But I want to talk about websites specifically because as long as I've been doing this, websites as a medium still continue to excite me. Websites as a medium excite me because there's no approval process. If you make a Mac OS app, then somebody can say, well, the Mac OS app that you made, that doesn't really look like something Yoni Eve would make, so we don't like that, and they can just reject it. If you do comic books, you can have all sorts of committees deciding on what's right in your comic book. When you want to make a website, you can just do it. HTML and FTP still fucking work. They still work, and honestly, they still work pretty good. So you can do Notepad, you can do HTML, head, title, body, and then you can just make it. And the greatest thing about that as an actual medium is that nobody gets to tell you that this is not okay. If you have an idea, you can do it for free. You can just make something, And maybe nobody goes to it. I've definitely made a whole bunch of websites that just nobody goes to, but it's scratch a niche. There's one on ahoylemon.xyz called Is This Nicki Minaj? It's a simple quiz where you're shown 12 pictures and you have to tell me if that is or is not Nicki Minaj. I'm not saying that's a popular website. I'm definitely not saying I've got traffic monitoring on it. I know what that traffic looks like. But I had an idea for a joke. I made it. I didn't pay anything for it. And that's what's cool about websites. I work at a company called Sass Labs, based in North Carolina. I have seen their office twice because that's not how I work. I work out of my home. And my role at this point is I am a front-end development director. That's right, development director. I'm properly management now. That's been true for a couple months, but still kind of tastes weird on my tongue. But it was something that I wanted to get into because I've spent a lot of time like working with sort of like less seasoned developers and people that had like motivation to try to like help them make the website that they could. So a lot of my job is mentoring, it's shepherding, it's documenting. I write code. I still do about 40% of my job is doing the thing that I'm the most practiced at, writing code. But plenty of the other thing is writing specs, is looking at PRs, of taking those PRs and bringing that into sessions about we've had these accessibility problems here, and this has been a trend. So we're not going to talk about this as a problem. We're going to teach this as a learning thing because the thing about, like, for example, accessibility is not a solved problem. It's something that is just about inches. In accessibility, better is better. And saying I can't do this perfectly doesn't mean you shouldn't do it better. So that's been my role, and this is me now. Actually, I am wearing the exact same outfit on this stage as I am right now because, branding's important. And if I'm going to spend the money on an internet jersey t-shirt, I mean, you better believe I'm going to wear it on stage a couple of times. But this is me now, and I get to, kind of like fly around to different cool countries and meet really interesting, fun people and hang out with friends and drink a lot. And that's me now, but like this was me back then. That is not a real gun, but that's good because that day was not the very best. I was just sort of being a gigging worker, just working at different bars because I do plenty of bartending, and doing this as well as making websites, and just trying to pay the rent, just trying to kind of get by. And as I was in that state, as I was just sort of like looking for jobs, I started to do contract work. And I liked contract work because in contract work, nobody gets to tell you that, in contract work, you don't really get to be part of the office politics. I can show up as a contractor in an office, and if it's Kathy's birthday, I'm not invited. And that's really okay, because I didn't really want to eat your crummy cheesecake anyway. I just wanted to do my job and get out. So this is a true story in my actual life, and what happened is I took a contract. And the contract was working for this company, and they had this legacy software platform, which was built in Ruby on Rails, which is fine. There's definitely nothing wrong with Ruby on Rails, but it was built in Ruby on Rails, and the way that they built it specifically had a lot of problems. So their idea was, we want to take the entire platform, we want to move all of it over to .NET, and we want you to do everything about the front end. And I was like, okay, well, I know how to do that. I've worked in .NET environments a lot, and I'm very much a front-end developer, and so I can kind of own this sort of thing. So I built a front end, and I built a front end as a contractor, which means that I was looking for tools. And when I was looking for tools, I said, well, Bootstrap is definitely popular. This is float-based Bootstrap, right? This is Twitter Bootstrap. So it had issues. And then I need some JavaScript, so like I'm going to use something called Knockout. If you're thinking, what the hell is Knockout? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I built this front end using Bootstrap, using Knockout, put the thing together, and like it actually went okay. I built this entire front end for a fairly complicated platform in a month, and then they offered me a job full time. And the boss that I had at that time was one of the best bosses I've ever had, and I really, really liked her, really respected her, and she was like, this is working out. Why don't you take this full-time job? And I was like, okay, yeah, you know what? I like this company. I like these people. I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop being Ronin. I'm going to stop kind of just jumping from job to job. I'm actually going to take a full-time role. And then I had a problem, which is that I spent a month building code that was supposed to be somebody else's problem. Now that's my fault. Now I have to go there and refactor all of this code that I did on the quick and dirty. So this is Jeff. Is anyone here named Jeff? By the way, is your name Jeff in this room? Okay, that's good, because that would be awkward. So the thing about Jeff is Jeff overcomplicates things, and every time you're seeing the name Jeff, what I want you to know is that Jeff is your enemy. Okay, so I want to talk about frameworks real quick. This is not a talk about frameworks, but this comes up a lot, for example, in songs by Dylan Beatty. But there's a whole bunch of frameworks that exist, because a client will say, like, we need a new website, and then somebody else will say, like, okay, well, let's just go ahead and choose a framework for this. And I get why this happens. I get why this happens. Is the framework is about patterns, it's about documentation, but like, there's a lot of frameworks out there. Bootstrap, of course, no longer float-based, also no longer owned by the company that was once called Twitter. But Bootstrap is still, I mean, it's less popular now, but definitely was popular for quite a while. Foundation, another one, Foundation by Zerb. They actually do a email template framework, which is pretty good. This Foundation for web. It's fine. There's one called Cirrus, which has actually been getting more popular in sort of like modern design concepts. We've got Element, which is, I mean, a thing that exists. We've got Material, of course, because we can't ever get enough material. So there's material like, for example, MUI Core, which is the React version. We've got Angular Material, which is the Angular 2 plus version. We've got the Vuetify. We've got Materialize.css. Because the thing about Google is that being a giant company, they've definitely A/B tested everything. And one of the things that we've all recognized as people that like live and work in tech is that if you adopt something that Google makes, they will never, ever, ever, ever shut it down. You'll never, there's definitely not a website called killedbygoogle.com with hundreds of tombstones of products killed for them. So if you're looking for any of these frameworks, like for example Carbon, which is that one's the IBM one. We've got Primer, which is the GitHub version. Primer is actually an interesting concept because Primer is done completely JavaScriptless. One of the things that's technically very impressive about GitHub.com is that if you're on GitHub and you just disable JavaScript, literally everything will still work. It won't necessarily work the exact same, but every single thing that works on GitHub also works without JavaScript because that's the way that they built it. There's like a whole bunch more. We've got Metro, we've got Montage, we've got Onsen, we've got YUI, which was the Yahoo one. We've got, there's some daggers here because like those are gonna be deprecated. So like, hey, if you ended up doing a website with that framework and that framework is deprecated, looks like you're the software maintainer on that thing right now, so good luck, buddy. Because the thing is that again, if you're working in like larger teams, like there is value to that kind of velocity, right? I think of these in three different ways. Is that like if I've got these three concepts, and I've got the concept of like of velocity. I can't see my cursor. There it is. If I've got the concept of velocity, then yeah, a framework might be really good. That's definitely one of the things that makes people reach for Tailwind, which I do have opinions about, but that's not either here nor there. But one of the things is getting that initial page on screen. And from doing that from a framework, you can definitely get there. At the point that you need to have some adaptability, you've got some concerns. At the point that you need to take a material framework and just change the rounding of the corners, you've got a bunch of refactoring to do. This will not be a one-line change. There's a whole bunch of things in material forms that assume a specific border radius, and if you change that, you'll have to change a bunch of other things. So this is not to talk about frameworks, it's to talk about two things, HTML and Sass. And by Sass, I actually mean CSS. I've been writing front-end code for quite a long time, And I write Sass because I have been writing Sass. So there's not a reason for me to not do it. It's part of the stack. The concept of pre-processing these things is just part of the way that I do things. But one of the cool things about CSS is that it keeps getting incrementally better. So a lot of these concepts that were introduced by Sass, for example, nesting, for example, variables. Like in CSS, you can totally write variables. You have to write them really awkwardly, but you can totally do it. If you do that in Sass, then you can not only have a variable, but also a variable that doesn't feel weird to type. So by Sass, I actually mean that this is something I like to use. It's something that's presented here for brevity, but it's not an actual requirement for any of the things we're going to talk about. I'm just talking about Sass for two things: brevity, and because solving layouts with pure Sass was just a title that I liked, so I just kind of wanted to lean into that. So we're going to talk about viewport width and viewport height units, and in that case, I've got a bunch of different ways to measure like a div, right? So I can measure a div in, for example, 500 pixels. I can say this div is exactly 500 pixels. There we go. I've got the width of a div is 50% of the container, which is cool as long as you're using the word width. Because if you're using the word height, that percentage thing is never going to do what you think it's going to do. We've got sort of the concepts of, for example, ems, which is the relative font size of the actual div itself. We've got, so that would be ems. We've got the rems, which are relative to the body itself. We've got a fraction, which is a grid-specific unit. We will touch on in just a moment. But we also have these things, the VW and the VH. And those two things are actually the definition of, hey, I don't know what the screen is. You tell me. You're the browser. But whatever the screen is, I want some percentage of that width or of that height. And so with that in mind, we can actually go through this objective, right? Which is that we like that Apple design, which was popular like iPhone 3, right? The whole thing of like, hey, you know what's cool about websites? Not that they're websites, but that they're magazines that you pretend are actually websites. And so we want that thing where every viewport height is its own screen, and we're just going to scroll down. And Jeff's going to say to me, okay, we're going to write a bunch of JavaScript to make that work. Shut up, Jeff. We don't need you, because we're actually just going to do this with CSS only. So we've got our main, we've got our sections. That's all of our HTML in that case. And then we're just going to say in our Sass that we've got a minimum height of 100 VH. And in that piece of code, and that piece of code alone, we have this concept, which is that we're going to go through and just have like specific screen heights. Now, there's something else that we actually could be doing at this particular time, which is that we've got this thing where we've got our sections, and then I actually want to add this bit right here to say that I want to create a scroll snap, meaning that if we're dealing with the idea of an actual viewport and we want that viewport to kind of be locked in place, well, now at this point, like we want people to scroll to that point. And so what you can do is you can do that with JavaScript. And if you ever have something that's in JavaScript that's watching scroll, you're probably doing dark magic, and that might not be an awesome idea. So what we can do with the scroll snap is we can actually just say, okay, so if somebody kind of gets to right about at the right point, it'll just snap itself back into place. And we can set tolerances on those things in order to kind of make it like more or less grabby. But we can do that like in CSS so that it's actually handled by the browser more efficiently. And like that's nice, but like we want, I see that request, and to me that request just says like I want parallax. All right, we're going to need shut up, Jeff. No, we don't need that. Shut up, Jeff. We don't need that because we've had this, our sort of section with some heights and some justifications and whatever. And then we're just going to add a little bit more, which is we're going to have this like sort of position relative background fixed element in the after. And so in doing just that little bit of code, we've got this piece of HTML where we've got a background image, we have our content, we have our inner. And in doing that, now we have our image, and then our image is actually separate from our foreground. And of course, our lorem ipsum content from DJ Khaled, because if you're looking for something meaningful that's going to let you celebrate yourself, DJ Khaled's words are the ones that you're looking for. So, okay, some easy shit, but like we can get a little bit better here because we've got the concept of grid layouts. Grid and flex are two things that exist a lot of times in modern CSS. You don't have to choose. Doing both grid and flex is usually the right answer, depending on what seems appropriate to you. And if you're wondering, is this a grid problem or is this a flex problem? It's actually right there in the word. Are you doing something that is actually oriented by a grid? If so, that's the thing. If you're looking at something that actually is flexible and you want to be flexible, that's a flexbox situation. But okay, so we've got a brand new website, right? And it's got a top nav, and then we're going to have a side rail, and then like a foot. Okay, yep, so a website. I mean, I get it. I know what a website looks like. And so Jeff was going to, no, Jeff, we don't need a framework. We don't need a framework for this. We can just do this in literally a couple lines of CSS. So I'm going to have my little div container here, which is the page layout. And then inside of that, I'm just going to do some semantic HTML. HTML semantics are definitely something that, as a website gets bigger, not only is it very much an accessibility win, not only is it a little bit of an SEO win, but you can actually maintain that code because you understand the importance of those things. That div soup way of doing things is, I get it because it's easier than making a decision. Like writing div is easier than making the decision of what that element is, but taking a second to try to make the right decision is going to pay some dividends. So we've got our page layout, we've got our header, we've got our aside, and then we're just going to define these concepts. So first of all, we're going to say like this layout is a grid, and then it's going to have some columns. First column is 260 pixels, and the second column, this is those FR thing we were talking about, is you're able to just say whatever you got left. I want 260 pixels, and then whatever you got left can go into that. And you can also do 2FR, 3FR in case you want to do like different fractions. So in those cases, we've got our like left side, which we know is always going to be 260 pixels, and then we've got the rest of it. And then in the case of our header and footer, we're going to say that those particular things are going to span two different columns. So in doing that, now we ended up with this, right? We've got our grid, which is, you can see like this sort of line down here, and this all the way goes across. And we've got that, that layout concept. So that would be one way to do this, and if I was doing this a little bit sort of quick and dirty or whatever, then that's probably the right method. But there's actually a different way that we could do this, is that when you're defining any sort of grid-based layout, you can name those areas. So you can say, I'm going to define a grid, and then like, this one's going to be area, or sorry, this one's going to be like header, this one's going to be a side main, and then you can just define out the grid areas later on, which when you're looking at like more complicated things with like dynamic sidebars or, God forbid, ads, we've got a whole bunch of ways that we can kind of like call on those things a lot more rationally. So then we've got the concept of repeating grids, right? And so we can do that in this case where we've got, okay, so we got a website layout, and then we want to have a page with a bunch of blog teasers. We're going to show an image and a headline. I mean, Jesus, you don't need to go on. Like, I know what this is. It's a blog teaser. I've written hundreds of these. Okay. I think I can do this. It's going to be responsive for all screen sizes. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Just shut up, Jeff. We don't. No, get out. All right, so we've got this image from the designer. They threw this together in Figma, and we've got some article titles. We've got these images. We've got kind of like a responsive sort of layout happening here. And then, of course, there's a little design flourish where the image is going to like just slightly get lifted over the top of the card, for some fun flourish. All right, well, that's not bad at all. We can definitely do this kind of card-based layout responsively pretty easy. So we're going to do our HTML, and we're going to sort of like, we've got our container, which is going to be the cards container, and then we're just going to do a bunch of articles, right? We've got our article called card, and bang, 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 bang. And then we're going to say, inside of this cards layout, we're going to say that there's going to be a grid, and then we're going to define the gaps in both rows and columns. So therefore, the space between the columns and the space between the rows is going to be different to compensate for that like bumped up image that we have there. And then I did this thing because I rewrote this piece of code so many times, and I tried to take this opportunity to talk to you about container queries, because container queries are totally here in the browser now, and they totally work great. And then I spent 25 minutes rehearsing a talk about container queries and realized I was on a little bit of an aside. So if you're saying to me, you could have actually written that container query, yes, I could, and I didn't for a reason. But we can define our concept of, we're going to take our columns and we're going to say, okay, so at this breakpoint of our 980, there's going to be 3 columns. At this breakpoint, there's going to be 2 columns. At this point, there's going to be 1 column, and all good. So what we've got in that situation is something that you would have to write a bunch of different media queries for, right? To say like, at this stage it's going to do this, and at this stage it's going to do this. But instead, by just defining that our grid columns change, we've got something that is like with not a lot of code at all, like properly responsive and holding on to our content. We can like look at that and go like, I mean, that's like okay, but we've got kind of like this concept where there's like a sort of squicky middle in here that just doesn't feel super duper awesome. And like this piece, which just, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's a little bit off. And the client noticed that too. So the client came back with, we want to keep going on this, because we've got this concept, and that breaks in a way that's a little bit uncomfortable. And what we're looking for is something that once we actually get down into the single column, we want to do change our actual layout, right? So we're going to change the image is going to kind of be over here on the left, and our headline is going to be over here on the right, and we're going to kind of like change those sort of things. But obviously we can't change the actual markup. So we need to do this in a purely CSS kind of way. Well, that's cool because we can actually just in that point put a grid inside of the grid. So our card here itself is going to say that we've got our columns is just going to be one single column, and we're going to put some space in between this thing. And then we're going to say, okay, and now actually once we're in the place where it's just a single card, like one single card, we're going to take that same piece of markup and change a couple of rules. Because doing this line and this line alone lets us do a grid with gaps in between, so you don't have to do the thing where you're like, I'm going to set this margin, and then I'm going to set this margin, and then I'm going to set this margin, and oops, shit, I set the margin twice, and now all of a sudden I've got double padding. We can just define our actual gap between the elements of the grid itself, but in this place we're going to make our grid more complicated, which is that we're going to have a 3-column layout of 2 fixed widths and that squicky middle in the middle. We're going to do this clamp thing, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. But then we're going to kind of like change some rules around to say like, now I've got these columns, and in the same layout, we're going to just change around these elements. So in doing that, we've got our grid inside of our grid, and using the exact same piece of markup that never has to change, we can go into a place where it goes into that look. And that's with, again, just a little bit of thoughtful markup and then just doing a minimal amount of code to break it in to that level. So, I mean, that's okay. Okay, we're nearly there. But you've worked with real people before. You've worked with real people, and sometimes real people make requests that, yeah, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story. So I was working for a client at one point, and the client said they had a competitor. And their competitor, they had a camera that was focused on Niagara Falls, right? And so people liked that about the website because, Niagara Falls, it's pretty. And so people liked that they would see Niagara Falls when they went to this competitor's website. And they were like, we would sure love to have a webcam on our website. And I was like, yeah, here's the problem. They are close to Niagara Falls. You're in a podunk forest. There's nothing cool to look at over there. What would you like the camera to be of? And they were like, we got it. We want to do, our website will always have a live webcam of our parking lot. And I was like, okay, all right. Well, let me draft an email. I was like, I see some problems. For example, restraining orders exist. If somebody wants to not let it known that they're in a place and you just shared their information, if you look at something on Google Maps and you see a license plate, that license plate is blurred out. There's reasons for these kind of privacy concerns. There's also a lot of situations where somebody might not, this company was a casino. Maybe somebody just doesn't want to let it known that they're in a casino. And I said, here's some downsides, and I can see a lot of these being massive problems, both like legal and business-wise. And what I do not see is the value. Because what I can see is somebody would go to the webcam, and they would go, oh, that parking lot looks too full. I'm not going to go. Or I could see somebody looking at the webcam and go, that looks dead. I'm not going to go. And I said, the business case I do not see, the business case I do not understand, is somebody going, looking at the webcam, seeing the parking lot, and go, oh, fuck yeah. You know what? I was on the fence. I wasn't sure I was going to go, but look at that parking spot. I want to park in that parking spot. That I don't see this happening. And so I've got all these downsides. I can't think of a single upside. So I need you to explain to me what business objective you would like to accomplish with this webcam. And she said, no objective, I just think it'd be cool, smiley face. So sometimes clients win. So we want to alternate the first image. We want it to go left, right, but we're also going to, in that case, just change the order of a whole bunch of our cards when it goes left, right. Because, when you're looking at a list, it's not like you would want things to be in the same order over and over again. So they're not going to explain our reasons. We weren't able to talk them down from this. And so now we've got the situation where we're in the grid right there. We're in the single column, and we just want to go left, right, but change a bunch of things around. Because our card here is all in a grid, we can dynamically affect that order, which is one of the things that's really, really powerful about both Flex and Grid, is that you can use the same piece of markup and just start defining orders. So you don't have to change things around in the actual markup. You can define in the CSS, like, show this thing first, show this thing second. So we can say that if the thing is even, then we're going to have it go, we're going to change the grid template, and then we're going to move around a bunch of these orders to make this compensate. This is incredible. This is something I use all of the time, because I will end up making a piece of HTML that's meant for screen readers first. I want to write the HTML almost like Markdown. And then when I get to the presentation layer, I can use this order to just make it follow the design closer. The one thing to note on this is that if you are using order, these are 0 indexed, meaning that if you say order 1, that's now going to actually be the thing that's ordered last. So if you are defining the order explicitly in your CSS, don't stop. Define every order of the things that are inside of that grid so that they don't get out of order. All right, so now we've got this kind of concept, and I mean, wait, what do you know? It actually, totally works. And we've got the tags are down here, but now for some reason the data's down there, and that's what the client wants. So that's what the client absolutely gets. But now we realize that we've got all of these blog teasers, and that's okay, but we want to get a hover effect. So okay, we want to make it so that when you hover over the card, the title's going to go orange, but also it's going to get bigger. And maybe it goes up a little bit. I'm not really exactly sure what okay. Oh, all right, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit presumptuous. I feel like it's a little strong. But we can definitely do that. We can absolutely do that. So let me just show you how. Okay, all right, well, never mind. I was going to actually show you my plan for doing this, but instead of that, I'm just going to grab a little bit of coffee here and let Jeff take care of this. So let's see what you got, Jeff. All right, so Jeff's going to do a transform, and then he's going to dynamically set negative margins on hover. So what Jeff's going to do here is that every time we're going to hover on something, we're going to adjust the margin of the top, the left, and the right by -20. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? Let's see what you got, Jeff. Okay, so let's go into, okay, well, that I have some, oh, okay, oh, 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 Jeff, Jeff, okay. Well, we can definitely do better than that. And we can do better than that in defining the concept of, let me get out of your example there, Jeff. We can get into that by defining the concept of transforms. So there's several transforms that exist inside of CSS, and the thing about them is that they are actually offloading their visual display onto the browser's paint. So if you're not familiar with the concept of paint, basically the browser will get a whole bunch of instructions. Here's the HTML, here's the CSS, here's the JavaScript, and the browser will go, okay, I'm going to paint a page. And then occasionally, the website will say, okay, well, now I want to change this around, and the browser does a repaint. And sometimes that can happen tens of thousands of times. That repaint thing is exactly why that thing was so jittery, because it had to, every time it took a -1 pixel, it had to just shake while it tried to figure out this reflow. In the case of transforms, you're saying what exists there in the DOM, it actually still exists in the DOM exactly as it was. We're just going to change the visual display without letting it touch the other elements. And it gets to get transferred over the GPU so that it's faster. So there's a bunch of these transforms that exist, right? We can actually define these into translate x, meaning like on the x-axis. We can do it on the y-axis. We can do it on the z-axis in case you wanted to kind of like have that forward thing, because like 3D in browser, it exists. It's got limits, but it exists and it can be cool. We've got the concept of translating something by both the x and the y-axis, or the x, the y, and the z-axis at the same time. We can scale to make something bigger. We can rotate it. We can skew it. We can do a perspective, which we're going to need to do if we're going to do anything about the z-index, because in order to affect what the z-index looks like, we have to first define the camera, which we're going to do in our perspective. And then we've got this thing, which I always know intellectually exists. And every time I look at it, I go, what does that do again? This has definitely never been in any of my production code. I know it's a transform that exists. And if you want to write a talk about that, the matrix transform, that's awesome. I'll watch it. Maybe I'll learn something. But we can say in this case that we're going to say, rather than this negative margin thing, we're going to say that I'm going to do two different transitions. I'm going to add a shadow. And I'm going to say that the transform is going to also be something that's transitioned. And I'm doing this with two different Bezier curves. So the linear is saying this transform is going to exist gradually, and the ease is one of those things that you tend to do with physics objects because of like the Disney like squash and smooch. If you've got something that physically moves, a linear transition can be a little bit unnatural. And something that actually starts a little bit faster or ends a little bit faster, it feels better to the eye. So we're going to do these particular things. We're going to say on the hover, we're going to change our scale, we're going to change our translate, we're going to change our z-index. And so in just doing that alone, now we've got the situation where we have kind of followed the spec, but when we do hover over it, again, the DOM is not changing. So what I do to this card here in the middle, the left is unaffected. The card on the left and the card on the right are unaffected by this because they don't care what's happening to this card because it gets its own transform. It's handled individually. So like, that's better. All right. We got another. Okay. Cool. Yeah. All right. Let's see what we got. Okay. Well, this is something that I get all of the time. I get it all of the time when I'm doing front-end development, which is that, in Figma or whatever else that might exist. I mean, I know that people still do Photoshops for website mocks, and if that's your workflow, that probably could be better, but whatever works, whatever works. But we still have this thing where we have this concept of design dev handoff, which is that somebody will create a rectangle, and they'll say, this is the desktop rectangle. And then they'll say, and this is the iPhone 5 rectangle. And it's like, awesome. Thousands of screen real estate resolutions exist. And so we can do something where we have this situation that happens a whole lot, where somebody will basically define like the desktop style sheet, and then they'll define the mobile style sheet, and there'll be some hard break where you'll scale the thing down, and the moment you get to this breakpoint, the entire layout changes. But what you can do in these cases is actually use something called clamp. And in clamp, you have 3 values. So if I have, for example, my headline concepts, because what I don't want to do is a situation where the headline is just too big. I want to have the headline be sensible to its place. So in the concept of our clamp, we actually have 3 values that we can set. So we're going to say we're going to have our minimum value, we're going to have our maximum value, and then we're going to set a baseline. So if it has to be in the minimum, it's at the minimum. If it has to be at the maximum, it's at the maximum. Anywhere in the middle, we're going to define this squishy baseline. So in doing that thing alone, right, we've got our inner, and then we're going to say in all of our headlines here, we're going to start clamping these font sizes. So we're going to say that our H1 has to be at least 32 pixels, at most 76 pixels, but then we're going to define this like squicky little midpoint of like 4.7 to say, okay, well, in that scale, do something sensible. This is something that you will have to do with a little bit of trial and error and just sort of like looking at it and see what visually seems better. If you can have situations of partnering with design teams, that can help get to that point. But what we've got in these cases is we've got our text, right? And it does max out because we do have like our inner container, and what we don't want is to have it just be the actual like VW baseline, because that would mean that inside of the container those headlines start to get way too big. And we've also got our minimum point respected, but in this particular middle point, we're going to keep this aesthetic. We're not going to make it be 2 different basically screenshots of a website, but something that has a min, something that has a max, and then something that just gets to live in the middle. It gets to work a lot with headlines, but there's a whole lot of things that you can use clamp for. And when you're doing those responsive designs, when you're doing something that we've got these 2 points defined and we want to figure out what happens in the middle, a lot of times clamp is the right answer in that particular case. We need a form. Okay, cool. I mean, I've done forms before, so yeah, all right. Let's see. Okay. All right, Jeff. All right. Well, maybe you learned your lessons from the last time we talked about these transforms, and you know, I think Jeff, maybe you're just getting better at this. So show me what you got. Okay. Well, I don't want to tell you. What do you think is wrong with this form? Can we give Jeff feedback? What's wrong with this form? Any thoughts at all? What's that? You don't like the split layouts. That's totally fair. That's totally, absolutely fair. Any other problems with this form? The slider is a number input. There's a whole bunch of different inputs, and you could just put an input type number, but you could also do this. And won't that be fun? Because like this is super like interactive. So, it probably is changing a value. Like I'm changing a value right now. My number is getting smaller, and well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly but I am changing that number. So maybe I get to find out later on what value I'm changing. Any other thoughts? You had your hand. Placeholders instead of labels. Placeholders instead of labels. No. Because I start to type into this thing, and now I lost the concept of what I'm doing, right? So I can pick up some of this context, right? I can pick up that like, all right, Michael was probably a name, but what I did lose is that it just says Michael. And it was asking for full name. And I don't know that anymore. I've lost that context. And I'm going to lose that context. I'm never actually going to give my full name because I lost that thing before. It's inappropriate. The other thing that is inappropriate is, hey, which field am I on right now? Which field am I on? We talk about hover effects all the time. We talk about this is what this button is going to do on hover. And that's great, and it's cool, and it looks nice, and it's usually something that you're doing for sort of like visual pop, and everything about that is awesome. But keyboards exist. Keyboards exist, and people use them a lot. we've got the concept of the siteless, right? So if we've got a situation where we've got a bunch of buttons, we want to add a hover effect because we want that to be a thing that happens. We also need to be thinking about focus because we need to be thinking about something that happens where the user tabs over to this button. And if you remove outline, then they'll lose the concept of where they are. You just took that away from them. You broke the website for them. And so what we want to do in the cases especially of these forms is we want to talk about this focus concept so that the user always knows exactly what they're looking at here. The idea of placeholders as labels, we just decided to just not label those at all because if we're not going to label anything, then we're just not going to label like anything. And then we've got like this select over here. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I have other thoughts, but we can move on because I want to show you a slightly better form. And so we're going to define something in the concept of a field set. So we're going to say, inside of our field set, we're going to take our input and we're going to do our label second. And I will explain why in just a moment. But we're going to have our label second, our input first, and then we're going to do this in our CSS. So in our CSS, we have our field set, and then we've got our input and our label. But what I've done here, is that I've said that on focus of the input itself, then not only do I want to change the border color of the form element, but I also actually want to change the color of the label, which is why it happens second, because one of the things that we do have to know is that in CSS, if you're defining a sibling, you can only define siblings afterwards. You can't define siblings forward. So if we want to do this, we're going to say that the label is going to change to the color, but we're going to have the label happen second, and then we're going to use our order trick that we learned earlier to make that actually visually happen first. So now we've got our better form. And in our better form, and this definitely could have some improvements, but in our better form, we do have the very concept not only of hover states, which that's an improvement, but also of our tab input. So when you're doing these, especially like long forms, I can go through this tab, and I want to be able to go through this tab and let that be on the actual on the inputs themselves. The other thing that I'm going to do if I'm doing this in some sort of JavaScript and there's some sort of action that happens on post, I'm going to do that on the form element itself rather than on the button click. Because a lot of people will put those ties onto the actual button click of submit, which is okay, except for you're going to have a situation where somebody's going to type something in, hit enter, nothing happens because your form actually didn't do anything. Or even better is they're going to hit enter and there's no prevent default happening on the form itself. So in the moment they hit enter, it's going to submit to nothing and they're going to lose their entire form. One of the other things that I did in here very intentionally is that I use an input called input type date because it exists and it works and it's localized. And then I don't have to think about this thing. All of those frameworks that are so crazy heavy to figure out, I've got some sort of date picker and there's going to be like a table and it's so much bloat and they're so complicated. And the idea of how those things are going to parse creates so much unnecessary activity where if I can just go input type date, I go, okay, well, if you're in one of the silly countries where month comes first, then it just will let month come first. If you're in one of the sane countries where we actually order those things in a way that makes any fucking sense, then it'll look that way to the user, but regardless, it's still going to submit as the ISO. So if I do 03 22, the year of 88888, like no matter which way I type that in, the browser is still going to recognize that as 8888 -22-03, and I don't have to think about it. I love to not think about the boring shit. We've got our password field, which is fine. Oh, apparently that was how many friends you had. So we knew that input type range was how many friends you had. We've got our sort of like our photo, and then of course like just a question that we probably didn't even need to ask, because like why? Why? And again, if there's a reason, and this is the case in so many forms, and I know this is not on the concept of Sass, but it's a very simple thing to think about, is that when you're making a form, you don't actually have to put everything in there. Because what are you doing with it? What are you doing with it? Did you need that information? Or did you just slow that thing down? Did you put a bunch of required fields in that and lose a whole bunch of people from filling out your form because they got bored? Because I definitely get bored of your dumb form. And if you can just have something that asks for the 2 pieces of information that you want, and then you can collect the other stuff later, you're making a whole bunch of wins. Going forward, oh God, okay, cool. We are in the speed round, no problem, all right. So let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, iframe, this is one line, this is one line, this is one line, this is all you need to do. There used to be something that people would do before this exists in CSS, and you might have seen it before, where people would do something where they would iframe in something, and they would create a div, and the div inside would be a holder that had a position absolute iframe, and then you would say, padding bottom 56.6667 or whatever things, and then you would absolute position the thing inside of it to like hold on to this aspect ratio. That's insane, and we don't need to do that because you can do this inside of an image concept, or you can do this inside of a image tag, you can do this inside of a video tag, you can do this inside of an iframe, and we can just say, this thing, I'm not going to tell you what the height and width are, what I'm going to tell you is the aspect ratio. So if we've got a situation, by the way, I love folding ideas. Folding ideas is just very fun. Anyway, so we've got this concept of we've got our blog, and inside of our blog, there's going to be this, this video, and it's going to max out, but we want to have it like always squished down and always keep the same aspect ratio. If we just set that one line, we're going to maintain our aspect ratio like all the way down. So yes, always do that. Content with Rail, we might have a situation where we've got our like long ass like docs, and then in the docs there's going to be this like sort of sticky like navigation thing, and that's going to go on forever. And what we want to do is not actually lose that that piece of interaction. So if you do this, there's a position sticky, which is basically saying I'm going to act as though I'm a position relative container, except for when I get to a certain point, I'm actually going to act as a position fixed. And again, this is something we don't have to touch JavaScript at all for. We're just going to do a couple of properties, and then this is going to stay like this. And even when I now get to the actual bottom of the page, it's going to go back to acting appropriately. So this is going to do what it likes without you having to set a whole bunch of watchers. Because again, if you have something that is a piece of JavaScript that's watching what happens on scroll, that's going to get weird. So position sticky, super duper valuable. We've got the concept of clip paths. Clip paths are cool because you can sort of define shapes, right? You can define like ellipses. You can define parallelograms or any sort of like geometric object. And we can say, for example, maybe I have like a JPEG and I want to cut it out to a circle. Well, I could turn that into a ping, but now I'm going to make that huge, and the color density is going to be really crummy. Or I can just take that and clip path that into a circle. So even though the image itself is a rectangle, the clip path is going to cut some of this stuff out. So if we do that, we can actually get sort of like this situation. So I've got my section, and in my clip path, I've just said, we're going to sort of like knock the corner out of this with our clip path. I'm going to do something where, that's nice and tacky. We're going to do something where, okay, that's really tacky, but you get the point. You get the point. We're on a big screen. I'm not trying to be subtle here. I'm trying to showcase tech. And we can do kind of like all of these things. Like inside of these are just JPEGs that I'm clip pathing out. We can actually combine that, right? Because we can actually take our clip path that we've already got, and we can define a shape outside. So in this case, we've got our notch right, we've got our notch left, we've got our ellipsis, and we're going to say, okay, maybe I put a clip path or whatever on here, but I actually, not only do I want you to float, but I want you to float against the shape that I'm going to define. And defining those shapes, you're creating not just float around a rectangle, but float nicely around however complicated of an object that I have. So with that concept, we've got like egg whites, and then we're floating against like this triangle. We've got turkey sausage, and we're floating against this different triangle over to the other side. And of course, because we've seen so many words from DJ Khaled, why not his face as well? Float around any of those kind of things. So where do you go from here? Really, it's just about get cooking. try out these things. Like front-end development is absolutely an iterative process and just something that is exciting, especially if you can see how you can make something simpler in just paring that thing down. Something like CodePen, just trying something out in CodePen is really, really valuable. There's a complete guide to CSS Grid, which is on CSS Tricks, which I think is super duper duper valuable to look at when you're thinking about grid layouts, just because it's all of that reference in one. Lynn Padgett did the drawings that are lovely, and so any sort of thing, because when you're getting into the concept of grid, a little bit of that syntax can be unfamiliar, and so getting that guide is a great thing to just learn the syntax part. There's similarly one for Flexbox, also on CSS Tricks. And then if you're looking at those shapes, right? Like, how do I do these? I actually like this Bennett Feely's Clippy, which is something you have to search for because you're going to search for Clippy. You're going to get the other thing. But you can actually just define, I want to take like this shape of like this hexagon and just kind of like play with it. And then it's going to give you the actual output there. And then the Sass documentation is really, really good. The other thing is that there's this talk, which is a picture of this talk inside of this talk, inside of this talk, inside of this talk, because I'm really, really very clever. And that's a reference as well. As well as, just, like hit me up. I've got an email address. I don't know what that thing is. There was a bird that I kind of spent some time on, but I don't really do that anymore. Mastodon exists. The session eyes. But also, I'm just around. If you want to talk about CSS, you want to talk about some issues or some thoughts to go around, I'm happy to do that. I have done kind of like workshops for companies as well, if you're looking for that as well. So with all of that, thank you so much. And you better believe that I brought stickers. So I've got the lemon stickers, which are proper and shiny, looking a lot like that. I also have stickers that just say, maybe you don't need all of that JavaScript, which I'm happy to give to you. I've got stickers for another website that I made called Kinda Fun, which is just I like websites that are kind of fun. And then finally, if you did successfully get yourself declared as sane, I've got those sane stickers for you. Also, my company's got stickers as well. So yeah, come up, talk to me, have some stickers, and also have a great conference.